We are joined by our panel, former Congresswoman Jane Harman. She is now at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Former Senator Joe Lieberman, who is heading up a new anti-terrorism group called the Counter-Extremism Project. CBS contributor Mike Morell, formerly number 2 at the CIA, along with Robert Kagan of the Brookings Institution. Welcome to you all. Well, Samantha Power says that other nations have agreed to participate in airstrikes into Syria. Any guesses as to who that would be? And I would take that as good news in a week when there hasn't been much, Jane.
Well, France is one. The UAE, I think, is 2, and I think some other groups from the neighborhood would be very welcome there. But the challenge is, who will be on the ground? That's the murky piece of this. As you covered in the last segment with Dianne Feinstein and Mike Rogers, there are several groups on the ground that could harm us. And if the al-Nusra group, now called or now part of a Khorasan group affiliated with the Taliban, affiliates with the bomb makers in Yemen and then gets some foreign fighters, I know this is really complicated, that group could harm the U.S. even sooner than ISIL. So we have to be very careful on the ground, and we need Muslim boots on the ground, and I haven't seen anybody sign up yet.
Yeah, I think the French said they would go only into Iraq with their airstrikes.
I think that's true.
But otherwise,
well,
I think you
Syria is the harder problem.
Yeah.
And if we're going to push back ISIL by air, somebody has to hold the ground, and we're training up some moderate Syrians, but that's a long, slow process.
Yeah, and that you're absolutely right. Who are going to be the troops that go in on the ground?
Yeah, let me just get back to the air for a minute, because, you know, it's about 11 days since the president went before the nation, essentially declared war against ISIS. I thought it was an excellent speech. Said he would go into Syria to follow them to their havens. I think it's very important that we strike ISIS from the air in Syria quickly, because in the midst of all the conversation about will there be ground troops or not, I think people in the region and maybe elsewhere are beginning to question whether there'll be American follow-through on the speech that the president made. So it would be great to have allies with us when we strike the terrorists in Syria, but it's not worth waiting much longer. I hope those airstrikes come against ISIS in Syria very soon.
And Bob, it's very important that the countries who join us, that some of those be Arab countries. And I think Jane is right, we're going to see that. The reason it's important is so that we don't play to the ISIS and al-Nusra narrative that it's Christians killing Muslims. It's very important to have those Arab countries with us.
Bob, the president keeps talking about the things, I mean, and I'm quoting his critics here now, the things we're not going to do. And you heard me ask Samantha Power about that. What concerns me, and I think what concerns some critics, is that he's diluting his message when he says what we're not going to do.
Well, partly the problem is he's diluting the message, but I think the bigger problem is that they're building their strategy backwards from what they don't want to do. If we've decided that that ISIS or these other groups are vital threats to the United States, you don't usually deal with vital threats to the United States by first listing all the things you're not going to do to go after them. We've had senior military advisors, generals, chosen by President Obama, who've made it clear they believe there has to be some U.S. military presence on the ground to make these operations work. But we see a president who's saying that's not going to happen. And I think that, you know, the biggest problem is a strategy that can actually have some success of working.
But the strategy needs a soft power piece, and that's why what Joe is about to do, launch on Monday, is so critical. Our narrative, our counter-narrative, not just ours, but the 40 nations in this coalition, against ISIL is what's going to win the day. The pragmatic Sunnis, who for the moment are supporting ISIL, are doing that because there is no real alternative. Maybe the new government in Iraq will be that alternative. Maybe something in Syria will be that alternative. But we've got to woo those folks back. If we don't win the argument, the coalition of 40, are never going to prevail against.
What exactly are you going to do?
Thanks, Bob. The Counter-Extremism Project will be a private, nonprofit, international action and policy group, which essentially is saying the greatest threat to our security, world security, today comes from extremism, and most of it today is from Islamic extremism, terrorism, violence. Governments obviously have to lead, but we think there's a role for people in private life. And we're going to do three things mainly. One, create a database of these terrorist groups and who's supporting them, their financial support. Secondly, we're going to work to break that financial support. For instance, if you're a company illegally buying oil from ISIL or ISIS, we're going to call you out and put pressure on you to stop. And the third, really important, and we're building support from leaders in the Muslim world for this, there needs to be a well-financed counter-narrative to the extremist ideology that is drawing more and more young, disaffected Muslims into this terrible, violent lifestyle. It's very clear, everywhere the extremists go, including ISIS, the people, the Muslims on the ground are terrified, and a lot of them are leaving. They don't want this. This is unpopular. But if the rest of the world sits back and doesn't provide a counter-narrative to this violence, they'll leave, and the extremists, with all their brutality, will dominate more and more of the world. We can't let that happen.
Bob, you were just about to say.
Well, I was going to say, first of all, that's critically important, and I'm really glad Senator Lieberman's taking this task on. It's important, and of course, soft power is important, but we are kidding ourselves if we don't understand at the end of the day, the people we're fighting about don't care about soft power, they don't care about the international economy, they are using force to accomplish their objectives. I think in America these days, we have somehow told ourselves that there are a lot of ways of dealing with these problems other than hard power. Vladimir Putin cares about hard power, ISIS cares about hard power, and in order even to accomplish these soft power objectives, you have to prove that you are also willing to fight them on the ground and defeat them. That's how you will get allies.
So two more things on the hard power side. One is I agree 100% with Jane that we have to find a way to get troops on the ground guiding and assisting the moderate opposition in Syria. That is the only way they're going to be effective. That either has to be the U.S. or it has to be other countries, hopefully Arab countries, but somebody's got to do that. And then over the longer term, there has to be a capacity building program in all of these countries that face Islamic extremists. And that capacity building program has to focus on intelligence, it has to focus on law enforcement, it has to focus on military, and it has to focus on rule of law.
But
what do we do about Assad?
You know, the president said, and he's right, he's our enemy. He's the reason that Syria is in the terrible shape it's in. Syria is in large areas ungoverned today, which is why a group like Khorasan, which is mostly Al-Qaeda forward deployment, has gone there. So I don't think there can be, we can both fight ISIS and fight Assad at the same time, and that's what I think.
And that's what we should do?
I think that's exactly what we should do.
We should attack Assad.
Yeah, we should attack Assad and we should attack ISIS, and we should support
and there's one thing in particular we can do in
Yeah.
Syria, which is, as we take strikes against ISIS in Syria, we can also do what we should have been doing over the past few years, which is taking down Assad's air force, which he's using to commit terrible humanitarian disasters. We can crater his runways. We can keep his air from flying. And that's something the Saudis are also asking us to do.
Let's understand that he already, with his air force, is attacking the non-ISIL groups on the ground. I mean, ISIL is helping him for the moment. We have to be careful as we get into Syria that we're not empowering the wrong groups and end up empowering him. Let's understand he used chemical weapons on his own people, something that unprecedented since the early 80s when Iraq did this on Iran, and Iran hasn't forgotten that. And I think we should continue to view him as a moral outlaw. And in these ungoverned parts of Syria, we do have a challenge because there is no effective governance on the ground. It's an ungoverned territory. Just one more point on soft power, though. Let's understand these messages that ISIL is putting out, which unfortunately are enhanced by running them on media. I wish the Western media would not amplify them. But at any rate, they're putting out effective soft power messages and recruiting all these psychopaths to their cause. That's who the foreign fighters are. There are some true believers maybe inside, and then there are these Sunni pragmatists. But the bottom line is the soft power that ISIL uses is how ISIL is growing its ranks.
Senator Lieberman is absolutely right. Assad is the key problem here, supported by Iran and supported by Russia. I would fully support going after him and his leadership team aggressively, but I don't want to do it in a way that degrades the Syrian military, the Syrian Security Service, and the Syrian Intelligence Service, because they need to be able to bring stability to that country when Assad does go. So we need to get rid of Assad, but we need to do it in a way that keeps the ability to hold that country together in place, so we don't end up with Iraq or we don't end up with a Libya.
I don't think the pilots who are dropping barrel bombs on civilian buildings are going to be the ones to pull Syria together after after Assad leaves.
How do you do that, though, Mike? What you're saying, get Assad, but leave his army in place?
I think we have to come to the conclusion that I think the senators come to, and I think everybody at this table agrees that he is the primary problem. So let's figure out a way of removing him from the battlefield.
Yeah, he will try to act as if he's our ally now because we have the same enemy in ISIS. But as others have said, sometimes the enemy of your enemy is still your enemy, and Assad is the enemy here. I think remember last year after the Red Line and the chemical weapons, the president was going to strike Assad's military structures from the air, pulled back on it, as we know. We're going to go into Syria now with air power against ISIS. There's no reason why we can't selectively use that air power against Assad, and that will empower the people of Syria, particularly the moderate opposition that we're now going to give arms and training.
Jane doesn't seem quite as...
I'm not as robustly certain that we have this mission in focus. I don't think Obama's strategy yet includes going after Assad. It certainly includes not working with him. I think these terror groups, again, it's complicated. It's not just ISIL. It's al-Nusra, it's Khorasan, it's these other opportunistic groups, which if they connect to Yemen and the bomb maker could hurt us faster using foreign fighters and clean passports than ISIL might. But we have to keep our eye on that. And let's remember the rest of the world. Iran, the deadline for the agreement is coming up. It's a very serious issue in the Middle East, which deserves massive focus. Russia and Ukraine. These are countries with nuclear capability or nuclear weapons, and an arms race in the Middle East right now in the middle of all this would be catastrophic.
Well, what would Russia do if we just declared war on Assad and went after him? After all, Syria is their client state. I mean,
I think we need to have a conversation with the Russians that probably will not go anywhere, but we need to have the conversation that says these Islamic extremists in Iraq and Syria are as great a threat to you, Vladimir Putin, as they are to us, because they're going to go up into the Caucasus and they're going to create extremism there. They're a potential nightmare for Russia.
I agree with Mike on that, but Russia obviously does not see Assad as an enemy as we do. He's their client, he's their agent, and I don't think you're going to be able to convince them to join us in that. Here's the problem. When Putin went into and took Crimea, I don't think he asked, what are the Americans going to do in response? I'm afraid he may have decided they're not going to do anything, and the Europeans are not going to do anything. I think this is a case where America has to show, with our allies, particularly in the Arab world, we're ready to act. And that action will create a reality that will not only bring others to our side, but will make it harder for Russia to respond. What are they going to do?
I think that the American people are so disenchanted right now with the president's handling of all this. The latest poll I saw showed 37% approve of the president's handling of foreign policy. Why is that way, and can the president turn that around?
Well, he just got a bipartisan majority in each house of Congress for the request to arm and train the moderate Syrians in Saudi Arabia. And he's just built a 40-nation coalition to support him. He's going to be at the UN this week. I think a new poll is needed, but I'd make one last point. Congress. The New Yorker says the policy at the moment is don't ask, just tell. Congress is ducking this whole thing. And I think that's totally irresponsible. The American people's voice is Congress. There needs to be a special session before or after the election and a debate and review of what our comprehensive strategy
Bob,
is.
your question is, your question is a really good one, because, look, I think the public began to lose confidence in the president on foreign policy because they didn't feel he was leading, and for a while they were happy with that because they wanted to stay out of problems. But then Russia, ISIS, Iraq, the whole combination has scared people. Now, I thought that the president's speech to the nation about a week and a half ago was going to turn that around. And I'm afraid it didn't, because there were too many of what you talked about before. Not just what we're going to do to protect you, Mr. and Mrs. America, but here's what we're not going to do. And that, I don't think that was particularly reassuring to the American people, and it was reassuring to our enemies over there. So that's why I say, Mr. President, order the U.S. Air Force to begin striking ISIS, at least in Syria right now, and stop saying what we're not going to do. Let the enemy worry about that.
Okay.
Henry Stimson had a great line. He said, a president can't ask the American people to tell him in advance if they would follow him if he decided to lead.
All right. I think we're going to let it stop right there.